everyone, so nice to see so many familiar faces, and welcome to this evening's TeachMeet on encouraging speaking skills in primary languages. I've got my colleague Pete with me here tonight. Those of you of our TeachMeets will have met Pete before. He is our resident blogger-in-chief in languages, and he brings an absolute wealth of experience from teaching internationally, which I draw on a lot. And you know, he brings a fantastic perspective to, particularly to some of the questions that people have, which is always really wonderful. So he's going to be here and sort of chipping in and joining in with me. So as always, I'm very grateful to have him with me. This evening, hopefully, it will be relatively informal, so because I want it to be sharing as many great ideas as we can, so feel free to drop anything in the chat at any point, and Pete and I will try and pick up on that. And if it's a larger question, we'll kind of put that towards the end and deal with it later. So as Emily mentioned, if you've been to previous TeachMeets, links were often put inside the chat. I've decided not to do that now, so they're all going to be in the reflections document, which is free to access. So that will give you all of the links to all of the things I've mentioned, so you don't need to worry about kind of keeping up with that as we're going along. So what we're going to look at this evening is obviously the importance of speaking, particularly at primary languages, how we create opportunities for it, some low stakes and low prep activities, so how we can really boost the provision and what we're doing, and you know, just more ideas basically. So looking at how we get that going, and really, you know, I always sort of kick off with some kind of quote from the national curriculum, but it's the English national curriculum, but the Scottish, Welsh, and the new first draft of British national curriculum are all relatively similar in that the focus is on practical communication. And you can take that as kind of your benchmark of what you're doing, that it's about communication. You know, if you're introducing languages to an earlier age, then obviously you can start, you know, focusing purely on communication skills. Evidently, there's going to be some reading and writing, you know, in it when they get older. But, you know, initially focusing on practical communication is the most important thing. So that's what we're going to look at, and how we do that really. So I often, you know, refer to this report because it's so relevant to what we're looking for. And just to remind you that, you know, Ofsted are not looking for rehearsed question and answer exchanges. And this truthfully goes all the way through up until secondary level. Spontaneity is what people are looking for. And that's really difficult because the word spontaneity sounds terrifying, because it imagines that you're doing some cold calling in class and you pick on someone to answer a question, which is all well and good if you're talking about a book that you've been studying in English, or you're talking about a topic in geography that you're working on. That's an awful lot harder when you're expecting someone to deal with a quick fire question in a foreign language. So, you know, spontaneity isn't quite the same for us in languages. What we're talking about is that it's a natural conversation. So, you know, the last thing you want to do is for a child of any age, and this counts from primary right through up until A level, in all honesty, is to go away and learn something parrot fashion and repeat that to you, because that doesn't actually give you any evidence of their learning or of their speaking ability. It'll give you evidence of their pronunciation skills and their phonics, but not necessarily of their ability to participate in an exchange. So that's kind of what we're looking for. This is quite important as well from their research review, is that they're looking for teachers to create opportunities. And I really want, as part of this session, to reassure you as well. So if children are sitting at GCSE in a modern language, they do a speaking exam, which lasts approximately 12 to 15 minutes. They have a conversation that lasts about 3 minutes to 5 minutes. They do a role play and they discuss a photo. Obviously, that's changing. There's new specifications coming in, but that was the kind of current outgoing GCSE. That's what they're doing. They look at a photo and describe it. They have a role play, so acting out, you know, the usual kind of thing, having a conversation at a ticket office, something a bit transactional or conversational. And then they have a general conversation about familiar topics. That's a maximum of 15 minutes. It usually lasts about 12, even less, you know, in some cases up to about 9 or 10 minutes. So keep that in mind, because there isn't any need for you to think that at the end of year 6, your children should also be able to sustain that level of conversation, because that's the end of Key Stage 4 of what they're aiming for. So, you know, dial it back realistically. And, you know, when you're looking for these opportunities, it's about helping them remember structures, communicating in an unscripted way is fundamentally what we're looking for so they can have a conversation. But it's about being realistic in your expectations. Think about where they're supposed to get at the very end of their secondary journey, at 11 to 16 journey, and dial that back to primary school. And remember that you don't need to put that pressure on yourself to expect them to have an exchange with 6 questions and answers, and they don't need to be able to have a spontaneous, and do this and do that and do that. They really don't. You want them to learn to communicate, to have fun with the language, to practice the sounds, and actually just to start using it. There is no emphasis in the national curriculum on getting it completely right. So you're not marking them on anything. There's that they want to, inspectors, if they're coming in, or if you're having a deep dive or any of these things, obviously there's going to be a focus on accuracy, because that's the nature of teaching any subject. You don't want to teach incorrect information, but equally, remember the focus is on practical communication. So focus on getting them speaking. It is far more important for children to speak, to not be afraid to speak, than it is to feel that they can only speak if they're going to get it completely correct. Because, in real terms, you can make yourself understood, if you travel to a different country, even with some errors. So, just to bear that in mind, so that you're not putting pressure on yourself. I always feel that, it's a hugely pressurized environment if you're not familiar with a language yourself. At secondary school, every teacher will have a language degree who's teaching a language. The vast majority of primary school teachers are not language experts. Do not put that pressure on yourself. There is simply no need. You're looking to create opportunities. That's what you're doing, to help them to make some progress. So realistically, these are the things that this is kind of paraphrased from the national curriculum, but with thoughts of looking at curriculum from Wales and Scotland and the strands of what they're going in. Because in languages, there are 4 key things: speaking, listening, reading, and writing. So speaking always forms a part of what we're doing. And listening is going to be tied in quite closely with that, because if you're participating in a conversation. So, opportunities, and you can kind of, as I always say, it's really difficult to decide what progress is going to be, because progress will be different for every school, for every cohort. But, you can look at this and think, well, okay, in year 3, we're going to look at joining in and responding to a language. So that means, copying you. That's as simple as you modeling a phrase or them listening to something online and repeating it. That's joining in and responding to a language, a sort of call and response, possibly. You're saying, bonjour la classe, and everybody else says, bonjour madame. That is joining in and responding to language. It doesn't need to be this huge kind of big thing. They're things that you can kind of fit in, with that practice. That's them answering the register, by saying, hello, or saying my name is, or something like that, including it. Exploring patterns and sounds through songs and rhymes. This is a brilliant way, because it gets pronunciation. You can sing along. We have songs at Twinkl, but you can find plenty of songs online, often with subtitles, and you could join in and listen to them. And sometimes the quirkier, the better. In my experience of going in and sort of doing transition projects, songs that I know children in year 9 would kind of be mortified at, in year 5 and year 6, children were absolutely going crazy for these songs and loving singing along to them. So, have a hunt around, a challenge to find something. So have conversations, that's on the list. But, be realistic about what that conversation is. The conversation might be as simple as saying, hello, what's your name? How are you? Goodbye. That's a conversation. It doesn't need to have, but you could, if you're identifying what progress is, say, okay, I want, children to be able, as I said, to ask and answer questions. By the end of year 3, or by the end of this unit, I want them to be able to ask and answer 1 question, and then that they can ask and answer 3 questions about themselves, spontaneously from a choice. So you have a range of questions you've taught them, because to a large extent, in many areas, the slate is wiped clean by the time children go to year 7. It varies depending on your catchment, your links with your secondary school, whether it's a trust, all of those sorts of things. That's not the same for everybody, but in some areas the slate is wiped clean. So you're looking at exploring the sounds and getting them participating. And it might well be that you're teaching a different language from the one they do in year 7 in any case. So it isn't a case of saying you must know these 10 questions. It's just, can they ask and answer some questions? Because it's about altering their tone of voice in a question. that's just as important as the content of it. It's understanding, the pitch and those sorts of things. So giving an opinion, this is always really important. And that's just as simple as saying you like or dislike something. Responding to other opinions. So if someone gives an opinion, could they agree with it, or could they give an extra opinion? Or, that could just be a response to another opinion. That could be conducting a class survey and then, collating the information. It's been quite creative at how you evidence these. Seeking clarification and help. Well, those are your standard classroom phrases. So it's learning to be able to ask to go to the toilet in French or Spanish, just to say, excuse me, or, those sorts of things. And, it's understanding kind of some classroom commands and factoring those in. So that's a great target to set children, if you're looking at the report, is a target to ask for, to try and use a sentence to ask for something in French or Spanish is great. So speaking in sentences, so moving away from words. So obviously that gives you some element of progression, that it's, at the end of year 3, I would hope that they could form a relatively short sentence. That would be the expected performance. And by the end of year 6, I would hope that children could speak in a slightly longer sentence, including an opinion, for example. But remember, it's not about quantity. One really good sentence that they have built is more important than 10 sentences rote learning. I know there's always that thought where, because you're comparing yourself, as we do, to other subjects, and it's about quantity, and children will have written pages and pages and pages. Again, at GCSE, to go back to that example, some of the writing tasks are asking for 60 words. That's barely a paragraph. So don't feel you have to make your children write 20 sentences. 2 or 3 really good sentences is ample. We're looking to develop accurate pronunciation, not achieve accurate pronunciation, develop it. It's a work in progress. How many times do we pick up and see a new word and don't always get it pronounced right ourselves in English? It's a work in progress for everybody, French teachers too. Don't worry about it. There are fantastic pronunciation websites that you can go to. Children can type in words and then practice repeating them. That's a really fun activity. Presenting ideas and information. This is one that kind of causes a bit of fear on the national curriculum, because you feel that children have to deliver a PowerPoint or something. But actually, it doesn't have to be, hugely complicated. Presenting ideas and information, they could be presenting their school, and it's just a case of saying, hello, here is my school. It's in Sheffield, thank you, goodbye. It doesn't need to be a 10-minute presentation. It's about being working with this quite realistically. And just describing things, so being able to give some information. That's what we're looking at, really. So it's finding opportunities over the time that you have them to do all of these. And they don't have to do all of this in one go. So select a few and build up to that. And that's what you kind of have as where you're expecting them to be at the end of year 6. So in the reflections document, which is there's a link to the reflections document. I've got a link to this blog, which is on developing speaking skills in the speaking class, in the MFL classroom. It's relating to secondary, but it's quite an interesting read, because it just reminds you it's really difficult to assess, because students are having to perform effectively. So, it's thinking about that sort of thing and what you have to do. And in the speaking exam, it's actually recorded when they get there, when they're in year 11. So that often causes fear, and filtered all the way back down to primary school. People are scared to make mistakes and speak out loud. And that also goes for teachers, TAs, HLTAs. If you're delivering and you've got to speak out loud in French or Spanish, and it isn't your specialism, that is also nerve-wracking. So, it's bearing that in mind and remembering it. But if children, working in pairs and groups as well, it can be noisy. Classroom management can be, a bit nerve-wracking sometimes to have them out. But, want to look at ways of how you can model and practice things today to make it actually really fun, and remembering at the heart of everything you do, it's a focus on practical communication. So if you face any particular challenges with, getting children speaking, whether it's your own challenges, please do feel free to pop them in the chat if there's anything you'd like to share. We love being able to kind of discuss these and move on them. Don't feel you have to contribute at all. There's absolutely no pressure. But if you do, are there any particular challenges that that Pete and I can look at and perhaps help you address and look at, then, do feel free to pop them in the chat. It's really nice to see. It's really helpful to come from you. Oh, here we go. Presentation, could that be a written form too? Could it be a poster? Yes, it could be. But actually, you probably need to do present the poster to almost an extent of that. So that's a great way of doing it, that you could actually have the poster, which is a written form presentation, and then it's just being able to talk through what's there. So you could effectively be reading it aloud as well. That's really great. Pete has written a great blog on this, in fact, which has got some great links. He puts an awful lot of research into his blogs so that you don't have to. And I would really recommend these. These are great for kind of coffee time CPD to have a kind of follow-up read, just to kind of embed some of these ideas. So he's got links to some great exercises, activities you can do, and just some theory and stuff as well. So I always recommend having a read of the blog. They're always a great way to kind of consolidate and think about these things in a less formal kind of way, really. It's just a nice read with a cup of coffee, really. Personally, I love reading blogs. It's probably one of my favourite ways for professional development is generally to read blogs. There are loads of fantastic MFL practitioners at primary and secondary and above, and I absolutely love reading what they have to say because their opinions are so relevant and so valid, and it's really nice. Even if they don't work in your setting, you often learn something from it. Leona, the links to the blogs are also in the reflections document as well, so everything's there. So things to consider when you're kind of thinking about your speaking provision, if you're a subject lead, is the progression points. So, what are you going to want children to be able to do at set points? Remembering that it isn't going to be about quantity, so you don't need to evidence 6 questions, and you don't need to evidence a set amount of vocabulary, but what works for you, what would you expect them to do? To think as well about assessment opportunities. Now, assessment can be really tricky for speaking, so it can be done. It's more and more common these days. My daughter, in fact, is in year 9, and she had a Spanish assessment this afternoon. And the most common way to kind of conduct that is the teacher sits at the front of the class, calls the child up, and they have a little conversation while the rest of the class are getting on with some work or revising. So it can be quite onerous, but that's one way of doing it. Another way, if you feel that works for you, is that children are working in groups or in pairs and they could peer or self-assess. You go around and assess their performance. It all depends if you are required within your school to give some sort of numerical or grade-based feedback, or if anecdotal feedback is sufficient. So it will very much depend on what's required in your setting and what you need to do. But if you are assessing languages, do remember that speaking should form a part of that as well. And that can also be reading aloud, because the new GCSE that's coming in, students have to read aloud. So that makes sense. That's a great thing lower down the school, because if they're struggling to pronounce, and that's brilliant for children who are struggling to formulate their language, you can also assess their pronunciation or their confidence at reading aloud and their willingness to try to learn to pronounce new things. That can be a really great way around it too. So there's kind of 2 strands to that, do you want them to be able to say it, but also do you want them to be able to form it and say it? Because there's 2 parts of that. So that could be something that you factor into your planning too. But really, you want to find as many low stakes opportunities as you can to practice speaking. Now, accuracy is very much, your call on this. Obviously, you want to teach them correct information and you want them to be correct. I would always say at Key Stage 2, the most important thing is communication. So if they get it wrong, it's far more important that they're trying than that they're having it perfectly. Please don't be intimidated by evidence that you see online of people showing these wonderful things. It's very different. If I went in and I was a full-time primary language specialist, I'm a trained language teacher. Obviously, that's going to be really different from somebody who's a primary class teacher who's teaching a multiple subjects and then has half an hour for French a week. Do not compare yourselves, because every school is different, every county, every trust is different, and people have really different experiences. Find what works for you and decide what's suitable for you. Lindsay, who's one of my colleagues in the team, is a current secondary teacher. She came to our 3 pillars presentation and spoke there. And she said, and this is something that you can access via the links in the reflections document if you want to watch the recording of that. She said the most important thing that they would want when a child arrives in year 7 is that have a go mentality. They want a child who's coming ready to give it a go. They don't mind if they're going to make mistakes, because they're going to teach it all to them again anyway. They want them to kind of not be afraid to participate and do that. So that's the most important thing. Spontaneity is the next one. Spontaneity, I always think, is a really funny one because I always feel it's like being put on the spot. Like if somebody said to me, it's like me quickly calling on Pete now and saying, Pete, give me your top 5 speaking activities. Well, that's not realistic. What, we have preparation for anything we do in real life. So, give children time to be spontaneous. They can't just automatically be spontaneous. You could say, in 5 minutes, I'm going to ask you a question about, you've got a few minutes to find your answer, work out your answer, then I'm going to ask you. They're still being spontaneous because they're not reading it, but you're just giving them a bit of prep time. Takes the stress away too. Factor in things like nerves and anxiety, factor in behavior. So speaking activities, I've got quite a naturally loud voice when I'm doing, I'm quite a noisy teacher. So I didn't, automatically sort of things would like sound to an external person like there was chaos going on in there because they were so noisy. So that in itself, particularly if you're an ECT or a newer teacher, can be really nerve-wracking when it sounds like it's absolute chaos, and it's not, but it sounds like it is. So factor that in. Some children will really struggle with the noise of that. If you've got 30 children in the class shouting out in French or singing or chanting in French, that can cause anxiety. So factor that into, think about those sorts of things, and think about if children are really nervous, you don't have to make them speak out in front of the class. They can present. If it doesn't say you must present to 30 people for the presentation bit of the national curriculum, they can present it to you, they can present it to them friends. If they're better outside the classroom in a small group, as long as you can hear them doing a bit of speaking, it doesn't really matter where they're doing that speaking. I'm going to talk a little bit in a while about evidence, or how you can evidence the speaking that you're doing, but do bear in mind working memory. So it's what you're expecting them to process. So they've got to think about the activity and they've got to think about what they're saying. So be realistic about what they're going to recall. It might just be one sentence, and that's absolutely fine. Don't think that they're going to sort of trot out to you a paragraph. Giving them thinking time, but also being really realistic with your expectations. Really, really remember, as I've said, you're looking at 12 minutes at GCSE is what they're going to end up speaking. So, if you add that up for the whole of Key Stage 2 and that you expect them to have spoken in front of you for 12 minutes over 4 years, then, that in itself is still quite a chunk, but it's not that much, and it's very easy to get ourselves all het up thinking about what we have to do. It's not that much. This is fantastic. So, as I say, working with SEND students with complex needs, project-based learning, cultural studies. Oh, I think that's massively worthwhile. Pete would agree with me, I think, on that, because Pete has talked about cultural capital. And I think that's absolutely wonderful because you are expanding horizons. There is still that element in what you're doing of teaching, that you are not teaching them to be a fluent linguist at the end of year 6. You are expecting them to have some understanding of the world around you, and you want them to understand that different languages are spoken. I think that's brilliant. If children are doing some greetings, introductions, and how are you, and they're doing some cultural studies, I think that's fantastic, and I wouldn't doubt yourself at all. I think it's completely worth it because you are giving them cultural capital, you're giving them an appreciation of the world around them, and they're learning so much more about their community. So absolutely, Louise, I think that's really worthwhile. As I said, it isn't about the quantity of language that's taught. It's about, what they're getting from it, really. So spontaneity. Be realistic about what spontaneity is. You're going to build up to it. You can't just put people on the spot. And you can only be spontaneous about what you know well. If you were to suddenly quiz me on primary geography, I could tell you very little. But I could be very spontaneous and I could answer a lot of questions about primary languages because that's my area of expertise. So, bear that in mind. You can't expect children to have fantastic recall and be spontaneous about something they did 6 months ago. So, bear that in mind. If you want them to be spontaneous, warn them that they're going to need to be spontaneous. Take the pressure away, don't put them on the spot. And practice and repetition is really important, particularly in languages where we're focusing on not just what's in the content of the sentence, but also how it sounds. There's a great article here, 5 tips to encourage spontaneous talk in the MFL classroom. And this is absolutely brilliant. The link to this, it's a very short article. It's actually from 2014, but it's still really relevant because, I think that kind of sums up everything really. And the link to that is in the reflections document. Key phrases on the wall so they can use them. You know, don't be afraid to put phonetic pronunciation, spelling there as well, if you think that would help. Take all opportunities to encourage them. So if they need a pen, they need the toilet, they want some water, even if they're just saying a word or they're saying please at the end of it in French or Spanish, that's progress. Give as much support as you can. So whether that's, you know, mats on the table, flashcards, any help, you know, anything at all. Don't feel they have to be able to do it all independently. There is nothing anywhere in the national curriculum that says they must be able to do all of this without any reference tools. Exploit the reference tools as much as you can. Rewarding bravery, absolutely. You know, any child that's prepared to speak up, that can be nerve-wracking in itself, but to speak up in a foreign language, fantastic. And build it into routines. So entering the classroom, holding up, you know, key phrase. Oh, this is a great one. Hold up a mini whiteboard with a key phrase at the door, and they have to give an example as they come in. So that could just be pet, and they have to say a pet as they come through the door. So they've said something even before they've walked into the classroom. These are all lovely ideas just to build up, and they're great because if you yourself are not an expert, that's not requiring you to do anything. You're just saying, give me one pet in French, or even if it's just give me a word in French. And even if they all just say bonjour, it's still them saying something. So, you know, don't worry about that. I mentioned evidence, ways that you can evidence this. Floor books are really fun for languages, and you can compile things. If they've done speaking activities, you can compile the actual task and put that in there. So, you know, remember that. Photos and videos. If children are speaking and working in pairs, video them, photo them, you know, compile it in your evidence. Audio recordings if possible, but you know that if it's going to place extra stress on you, there is no requirement, unless your school dictates that there is, for you to have to evidence an audio recording of every child in your class speaking Spanish at the end of year 6, you know, unless that's something your school is requiring. So don't, again, you know, be wary of the pressure. But checklists and tracking sheets. One of my colleagues, Maz, she came to talk at the last TeachMeet on assessments, on deep dives, and she was saying from her perspective as an assistant head and head of languages in a primary school, was that really you want to know, you know, who's meeting expectations, who's exceeding expectations, and who's, you know, working below expectations. And that's kind of all you're looking at. So, you know, you don't necessarily need to be able to say, did they pronounce all the words correctly? You know, you can make your own kind of checklist on that. So, you know, be quite free with it. You know, self-assessment, peer reviews and feedback could be, could you understand what they were saying? Do you think their accent sounded good? You know, you're not necessarily having to check that they've got everything right, but it's, you know, did they put on an accent? When they were saying a question, did they change their intonation? Could you tell when it was a question? Anecdotal records are great, you know, so, you know, with speaking as well, if you're not under any pressure to give some sort of grade or numerical feedback for speaking, then anecdotes in your planner are fantastic. Learning journals and portfolios too, whether you put something together for languages and you just compile this as you're going along, you know, those are really nice ways of gathering evidence that you just kind of add to, almost like a languages scrapbook as you go through. So if you've got any fantastic speaking activities, do share them in the chat. I'm going to move on now to just go to sort of a bit of an examples blitz, really, of some great activities that you can do. Some of my favourite ones over the years. And with all of these, a caveat I would say is that some are absolutely brilliant and some don't work with certain classes. And that will always be the case. You might try it one year and it's like one of my favourite activities may not work with a certain class, you know, so there is that kind of caveat that goes with it, that you will always get a different reaction. Different children and different groups will always respond in a different way, but it's a great way of increasing what you're doing and getting the speaking, but without, more importantly, having to give yourself extra work, having these kind of things ready, just these ideas ready. And these are kind of very MFL teaching ideas. They're great to have sort of stored in your mind to just, you know, they're great for 5 minutes here, there. They're brilliant for starters and plenaries. And they're great if you've got not much French time this week because your time has been taken for everything else, which is often the case. It might just give you a great idea of something that you can do for 5 minutes. It's all right, we're just going to do this for 5 minutes just to remind ourselves, a bit of, you know, retrieval practice. This is probably my favorite game, which is Pass the Parcel. And the best thing about this is that you just quickly need some music. It doesn't even have to be French or Spanish music. It can just be a really current pop song. Anything that's going to get them engaged, I would say, frankly. You don't need a present. You don't need a parcel. normally just a whiteboard pen or something that I can pick up and hand out. You pass it round, the children pass it around the class quickly. When it lands on them, when the music stops, they then have to do whatever it is, which it might be answering a question. So it's going to be, when it lands on you, say you've been learning je m'appelle. When it lands on them and the music stops, they have to say je m'appelle and their name, and then it goes on. Super simple, requires nothing. Even better if you can do it with French music and it's a song that you come back to time and time again that they can sing along with. That ticks another box at the same time. You don't need, it can just be anything from a paper cup to a board pen, anything at all, that you just pass around, and they quickly pass it around the room. If you've got some sort of French thing, sometimes I've passed around a French flag, or and they have to wear the flag when it arrives. That can be a bit of fun as well. Or a hat is often really good, that you just have it in your classroom, you pass it around, and then they have to say whatever it is that you need them to say. That worked well with planned spontaneity as well, because then you're telling them you're all having this, they know it's coming, and it's coming now. Oh, that's a lovely idea that Louisa shares. So everybody stands and you make a statement, I have a brother, and then they have to sit down if it doesn't apply to them. That's an absolutely lovely idea. Yes, Polly, noughts and crosses. Yeah, we're going to come on to that in a bit. So it's absolutely brilliant as well. Another of that is hot potato, or it can be like a ticking time bomb. Again, you don't need a potato, but that can make it really fun. And they pass it round, and it's a bit like you can do it with a timer rather than music. And it's like ding, 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 ding. When it lands with them, they don't want to keep the potato. You've got to get rid of it. And when you say stop, and you don't even need a timer, you can face the other way, and they're quickly chucking the item. It can just be a ball. It can pen, anything at all. When it lands on them, you turn around and that person has to say something. Similar kind of concept. Works quite nicely in groups as well. You could give them all something in a group and they could play it amongst themselves. And when it lands on you, you've got to give the answer. A question ball. Get yourself a beach ball. A really cheap beach ball. And you can number all of the colours. And, when they land on them, the number closest to them, pick a number, and then you give them a question for the number. Or if you land on, or a colour, and they have to do something based on that. So, number one, right, number one, I'm throwing it to you, and whoever catches it, they've got to do a task. And that can be, they have to say something, again, relatively simple. But, just quite nice to have a ball. Works in the same kind of way that you just quickly throw it around. You don't even need numbers on it, but you could even put questions on the ball, but it's up to you. But you could have the same questions. So say you have a ball for year 3, and the questions that you want them to answer at the end of the year are, or at the end of the term are, what's your name, how old are you, how are you, do you have any brothers or sisters, do you have any pets? You put all of those on there. When it lands on them, they pick a question, and around it goes. Really simple activities. It doesn't involve a huge expense, and you've got that ball, it's always there, off you go. If you've got time to kill, your lesson's finished early, or another lesson's finished early and you just want to do a quick bit of French, out the ball comes, and they know that that's when they're doing some French speaking. Simon Says, which is Jacques a dit in French, or tends to be anything from Pablo or Pedro, dice in Spanish. It kind of varies, or Simon, dice, kind of varies depending on who you're speaking to. But fundamentally, a game of Simon Says works brilliantly. That may well involve you having to do a little bit of planning because you're having to do the speaking, but it can be great. But this they could play in their groups. So then take the focus. If you are nervous yourself about speaking in French, they can play Simon Says in their groups, and they take it in turn to be the person giving the instructions. So one person each time has to say something, and that can be quite nice. Also, it can be Simon Says repeat. So it doesn't have to be an action. Obviously, it's great if you're learning parts of the body or you're learning actions or those things. It's perfect. But it could be Simon Says, repeat after me. Repeat after me. And then you give them a sentence and they have to say it. So it can just be a different way of doing some choral repetition. Very simple. Pass it on, and you could have a sentence and the children pass it around. Perfect in groups. Anything that gets them laughing because they're saying something, they're whispering, so they're not embarrassed if they're doing it, in a funny voice, or they're whispering, and nobody else can hear them. And at the end, the person has to say it out loud, even if it's silly, and they sort of finish off by going, je m'appelle blah, blah, blah. Don't worry about it. That's absolutely fine. If they're trying to do it and they're making some effort in the language, I would let that go. If it was somebody in year 8 or 9, I'd be expecting them to give me the sentence. But at year 6, the fact that they're just in year 3, you thought the fact that they're just going around and trying to say something to each other, but don't make it too complicated. It could be a color. So they're just passing the color bleu and they're just going to whisper bleu, 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 bleu all the way around until it gets to them. And then, they have to say a color at the end. Don't expect enormous things, just something very, very simple. Language detectives. You can be a detective yourself or the child can be a detective. So, this can be quite simple that you're saying, I am thinking of a food, that I like. And they have to come up with hands up, j'aime la pizza, j'aime le chocolat, whatever. And they have to come up with your ideas and you say, no, that's not it. Or you can have a child doing this and they're facing the board and the children behind are saying something and they have to guess who's speaking. You can have any sort of variation on this, or it's, you have to guess what I'm thinking or guess who's speaking. Various options of playing that game. So how you're doing it. Dice roll is a great one because this is a lovely one to play in groups. It also works quite nicely at the front of a class with one of those random dice generators. You can have a grid yourself. I used to have a bank of these that were laminated, and then you could put questions on them. So you could make your own grid and it would say, a food or something, and then when they land on it they have to make a sentence about that, depending on whatever your topic is. Or there's an example here of a really simple one. If you roll a 3, you're picking je vais au Pays de Galles en voiture avec mes amis. So you're giving them everything that's there and they're effectively reading aloud, but you are giving them the information and they're saying something different each time. It's just quite a nice way. And you could just play that with a random dice generator. Something's on the board, online, quick, free dice, and then they just say something. Or it's a nice one in groups. And also put the control to the children. So get them to actually put this together and make the sentences. And then they do it. So it's even better. So it's even quicker. So, if you've got the dice template made, you can fit absolutely anything in there at all. You could even have one, on your whiteboard and it's up there and they don't even need their own copy. It can be on the board and then they've just got a dice in groups and they have to say it and make sentences with it. So they're making spontaneous sentences. You can obviously change that and mix it around. But as I said, there's a simple version there just to give you an idea of how that could work. Say what you see. Now, at secondary school level, children will be saying, there is a man, he is playing tennis, it is sunny, he's wearing, obviously I'm not looking for that, but je vois or veo, well, they can see colors. So I can see yellow, you give them a picture and it's like, the football one. I can see yellow, I can see red, I can see white, I can see green. Straightforward. What else can you see? If you find better pictures than those, there are lots of things. I can see tennis, I can see basketball, I can see football, etc. I can see a ball, I can see a t-shirt, I can see a hat. It's those sorts of things. It doesn't have to be anything but a simple sentence with just je vois. This is also a brilliant stretch and challenge activity because you could give a dictionary to some of your children who could look as though they could exceed expectations and say to them, here's a dictionary, start with je vois or veo. What can you add on to this to say what else can see? So they could look up the word for tennis court or tennis racket or, but you could pick anything there at all. They might not know the word. Oh, I can see shorts. I can see a man. I can see a team. Think of that. Obviously, I realise I've completely picked a set of men there playing sports, but it could be a picture of absolutely anything. But again, you're not expecting them to say anything other than I see or I can see. But you ask them to extend it by saying and or I don't see, and then they could make up, oh, I don't see a car. I don't see a tree. And add to it that way. So, very, very simple. And you can even then flip it and do a say what you don't see. So they're practicing a negative. Je ne vois pas. And, and what's there? Simple, quick photo up on the board. What can you see? Also a great starter plenary and a great challenge activity as well. Noughts and crosses, as Polly's mentioned, this is the best because you can very quickly draw it on the board. And back in my younger teaching days, I would have a variety of noughts and crosses grids filled with different things. You could put pictures behind them and then they have to choose a picture. You could put numbers and they have to say a number. You could put anything there. It could simply be that you number them and it's like, well, I want square 3. Okay, what do you have to do? So it could be as Polly said there, you've got a different picture of vegetables in there. So they want potatoes, they have to say pomme de terre to get it. If you've got, that involves some preparation. You can just draw a noughts and crosses grid on the board, number them, and then they say, well, I want number 3. And then you've told them what they have to do. To get that, you need to tell me if you have a pet in French, if that's what you're learning about. And they could go, number 3, j'ai un chat, and they get the point. You can even, add to that, and the other side of, you just split the class into one half of the class is noughts, one half is crosses. You can even do it that they judge, and they get to say, no, I don't think that's what, if they make it raw, if they get a mistake, it goes to the other team, those sorts of things. You can add all those sorts of things in there, but that's probably the easiest possible way. You can even expand on that to make Connect 4. And that works really well if you're teaching verbs in particular, because you can build all the people of the verbs across the bottom of the verb and they have to say something. It's a little bit harder at Key Stage 2 with some of the vocab, but you could work on that in a similar principle. And you have a grid ready made and you fill in, very simply, I used to just, back in the low-tech days, I would draw a grid on the board and have a red pen and a blue board pen, and you'd get a counter and I would just colour them in. And remarkably, some of those games are sometimes some of the most successful of all. And you're generating, 9 different speaking now, which is always great. 2 truths and a lie. If I go to some sort of CPD or activity and someone makes me do 2 truths and a lie, as adults, we hate these sorts of things. But actually, it's a brilliant speaking activity. So, it could be, je m'appelle, and they put a different name. J'ai 3 ans, and they put a different age. So we're talking immensely complicated, and then they have to guess which ones are wrong, and they might be very obvious, but it's quite fun, and you could give them some prompts as well, so it's based around what you've been doing. Counting to 21. So the aim is to count from 1 to 21, that anyone can shout out a number at any time. So someone's there, they're brave, they go un, someone else goes deux, someone else goes trois, but if 2 people shout out trois at the same time, they've got to go back to the beginning and start again. This can work with any item of vocabulary, so you've just got to shout out a pet. And, how many can we get through until, if somebody's repeated it or said it at the same time, you go back to the beginning and start again. Really simple, always a fun kind of game. The risk with these is if you're a younger teacher, they can be a bit nerve-wracking because they feel a bit chaotic, but they tend to be really fun, and they're just encouraging spontaneity, because it doesn't matter if you get it wrong. And children, if there's a competitive element, chances are many of them are much happier to try and speak in French or Spanish or German or whichever language you're learning. This is quite a fun one, but it can be with gather anything. So you ask children, first of all, right, find as many coloured pencils as you can. And they gather them. And then, right, for every coloured pencil, you've got to make a sentence. And, this can work with, gather all the glue stick. Well, probably no glue sticks left, but you know what I mean? Something that, gather anything that you can find. So gather as many pens as you've got and then count it out. And then, count out for every pencil you found, can you say something? It doesn't even have to be a sentence. It can just be say something for every pencil that you found, and they count it out and, listen. And then that can be a great listening activity too, because they have to challenge to write down and listen what their friends have said. And that obviously can be on any topic at all. A shopping list, I went to market and I bought, is always super simple. You've got je suis allé au supermarché, or fui al supermercado y compré. But those are long sentences. You could just simply say, I bought. Or you could just have the items of vocabulary. If the aim of the game we're just wanting them to say some French, then just an item is absolutely fine. Remember that. You can add it in and say, if you want to, you can add in this sentence, but you don't have to, because that's a lot to have to say and produce, particularly because we're relying on working memory to remember what everyone said and all of that. But, this one can work really well in a group. If you put them in a small group, because it's a bit easier, and it puts children who do have working memory difficulties under less pressure because they've got, fewer items to remember. You could also just have the words so that they've actually got them there as well. But, that's, simple activities to get them speaking. Like a what's the question, Jeopardy type thing. So think about some facts about yourself in French. This works well at the end of the year. And then it's, can you find the questions to go with it? So, it could just be deux frères, as-tu des frères ou des sœurs? You said 2 brothers, have you got any brothers or sisters? They put a date and they say, what's the date today? Or when's your birthday? La musique, music. Oh, that could be what hobby do you like, or what's your favorite school subject? There's a variety of things that could be. So, it's a bit of a thought process there, and, they're having to think about things and read things aloud, which is nice. Class surveys are great. If you're doing something and you're learning transport in French, you're asking everyone how you get to school. Well, that's super simple. Your survey's on that. But you can make one up about absolutely anything. So, you can make up a question, on any topic at all, and you predict what people are going to say, and then they go around the class and they ask their question. Everyone else can just say yes or no, or maybe, or sometimes. You don't have to have, this expecting a huge sentence in return from them. You could challenge some children to say a bit more, but simply, just a yes or no, because it's actually you're practicing the question and the focus is on the question intonation. So that's quite a nice, simple way to get them speaking. Similar to I went to the supermarket, I went to the zoo. Or, you went anywhere at all and, you saw an animal and then you list all the animals that you saw. But, I saw is obviously you don't even have to say I went to the zoo. It could just be I saw a lion, and then, you go that way. Again, great in groups because, less to remember. Name game works in the same way, but this time they're actually controlling what they're saying about themselves. So, their name and something about themselves, anything at all. So, it could be, I like pizza. The next person says, oh, her name is, and she likes, my name is, and I like. Obviously, this gets a lot to remember, and it can be quite challenging. So, this would realistically, be realistic about how possibly you could expect them to respond. It may well be that they just do it in a group of 3 or 4, and they have some notes to help them. They would need the structures, il s'appelle, elle s'appelle, il aime. So you give them the structures ready. So, don't feel that children have to produce everything. There is nothing anywhere in the curriculum that says they can't have a reference guide. So remember that. Give them all the prompts that they need, that's going to help them. But, you can modify these so your expectations are lower. It could just be that they pick a word and everyone repeats the word. It doesn't even have to be a full sentence, but, this is quite nice. Also, if they already know everybody's name in the class, it kind of helps because they could just say, my name is Mariana. So, and his name is Dan, and her name is, because it doesn't matter, because you're getting them speaking. It's their pronunciation. They're using conjunction and they're fitting things in. That's, absolutely great. They could even make up a name if they wanted to. It doesn't have to be overly complicated. Spending the words is quite a nice one. So you give them a list of words, and they have to try and say as many of these words in a sentence or in a series of sentences as they can. Obviously, it's not going to be many, but, you could just give them a pet, a number, a word like and, a word like but, je, simple things like that, and they have to say it. And every time, you give them a little tick list, and every time, you can either do it one way, that they have a tick list and they tick it off when they've said it, or, it's like it's a penny or, a euro for every time you've used this, and you add up at the end of who's got the most euros for how many words they've managed to say, and then the person with the most euros, they could use those sort of figurative euros, and there's a prize that they purchase with it or something, just little things like that. But, just simple ways to do it that require no preparation. Wrapping things and rhyming things. There are loads of websites that will make things rhyme for you, but get them to wrap it. So choral repetition, if you're just learning the alphabet, if you're learning some pets, get them to wrap the pets, do it in groups. Don't feel that, I know that there's a massive sense of panic because you don't have an awful lot of curriculum time, but you can just put them into groups and say, off you go, rhyme away, rap, you've got 5 minutes to make a little rap. They can then perform that to each other, just to make it fun communication. And reading things aloud, whether that's something from a book, whether that's just something on the board, it doesn't, as I've said, they can practice reading aloud. This is a nice exercise to do, in pairs or in groups too, and you can use it for assessment. They're just reading things aloud. Fizz buzz, which you'll know from kind of maths or other things, but, instead of, normally it's like a multiple of something, you say fizz or whatever it is that you say buzz. Well, in this case, if you're saying, you're talking about pets, every time somebody says the word, the word and, you have to say fizz, or the word a pet, you have to say buzz, so you could just substitute out those words. If, you're getting more complicated to year 6 and you've taught a few sentences with nouns, then it's like, what's the noun is fizz? And you could go down it that route. But, you know, equally, it could just be just a simple, fun way of doing it. That it's, you know, anytime someone says and or je, or the simple ways, just because anything that makes them laughing while they're speaking French is or Spanish is a good thing. The old favourite Guess Who is always lovely. You know, most classrooms have got some Guess Who boards hiding around there somewhere. You know, or you could just find some pictures online if you've been doing descriptions. You may not be teaching that, don't worry if you've not. But if you have, that's quite a nice way to practice things, to play those sorts of games. Again, give pupils prompts so that they know what they're saying. Entrance and exit tickets are always fantastic. So as I said, we saw earlier that example, have a mini whiteboard. As they come in, they have to give you a school subject. As they leave, they have to tell you an opinion. Every time, you know, you've got them, and you can do this at other times in the day too. Or, you know, get it to do the register, you know, even if you've already done the register and French or Spanish is at a different time, do the register again, and they have to, you know, this is our French register, you've got to answer in French, and they have to say something, you know, just to practice those kind of things. Always, you know, really great activities. If you've got any other activities to share, please do pop them in the chat. We absolutely love having those to share. They're always brilliant. Some more ideas. I'm conscious of time, so I'm just going to kind of keep going with these. Board games are absolutely brilliant. We have the links to these are in the reflections document. We've got some brilliant board games. But yes, there's a lot of preparation in these. But once you've got them for years, and they're made. And they're absolutely lovely, and they're really great for getting children to call things out loud. But you know, even yourself, you could have a noughts and crosses, a snakes and ladders kind of game, and it could be that they're practicing the numbers and they're saying the numbers out loud, etc. But we've got loads of great board games in French and Spanish, and these are super fun ways to practice language in a fun way. They're also great, you know, if you're again, if there is some sort of spare timetable time somewhere, if such a thing ever happens, they're, you know, lovely things to do. Don't feel that every week you've got to teach new vocab and do something. Stopping and doing this, you know, the year 7 teachers will thank you for making primary languages fun, more so than giving your children a list of words that they've learned. If they've come having enjoyed their language lessons, they're going to be much more amenable to learning from year 7 onwards, and that's far more important than feeling that you have to cover a whole list of words or grammar points, for example. Card games like loop cards, you know, they go around and they have to swap things. It's structured speaking, but it gets them all saying something without pressure. We've got loads of different games like bingo. They can play it in groups and they have to call out the phrases. We've got some sort of sentence building games. There's like a game, it's a bit like, I can't think what game is actually called, the actual sort of brand name of it, but it's a game where you've got some words and they have to sort of spot the word that's there. Those are great games, you know, simple dice games like the Savoir game that are there. They're really fun ways just to get them speaking quickly. Songs are fantastic. We have songs, but also any song you can find online, particularly with lyrics, funny, quirky ones, the better. Get them singing, even if it's the same song all year. Find a different song for all year, and you know, go along with that, and you go along with that. We've also got active languages videos where we've got sort of dances to the songs, and those are really fun as well. They're great for a movement break, and you're doing some communication at the same time. Stories are another one, and we've got a really fantastic growing range of ebooks. The wonderful Pete also does the English narration on these, so they're really lovely. But they're super little stories, and they're said in French. The English translation is there. They're very simple. Children could read them with a partner, and they read them aloud. This is also a lovely activity for Stretch and Challenge as well, to kind of say, to work with the ebook and read it aloud and go through that and try and pronounce those phrases, note down any new words. Great kind of things. We're adding to that all the time. We've as well, you know, we've got loads of topic-based activities on everything. So, you know, you can find a speaking activity on pretty much anything that's there. And if you can't find what you're looking for, you know, drop us a message at Twinkl Cares and we'll do our best to get that made for you if you've got an idea. We've also got lots of Key Stage 1 ideas if you're thinking of starting languages earlier in your school. If you are, Pete's got a great blog on that as well. So the links to that are in the reflections document. Pronunciation is important, evidently, and with the 3 pillars of language learning, you do need to focus on that. Spanish pronunciation is an easier task because it's much more of a phonetic language, but we do have a French phonics range that's there to support you as well if you need some extra help with pronunciation, because that can also help, you know, because there are so many speaking where they're doing lots of copying the words, and if you yourself are quite nervous with some of those things, it's a brilliant way to kind of practice the sounds and spellings of the language. If you're looking for more kind of languages CPD, do check out our taster pack and our languages CPD section. We've got videos, we've got all of the recordings of the previous TeachMeets, we've got teacher packs, we've also got these great topic vocabulary guidance packs. So we've kind of grouped all the most common words that you'd come across in Key Stage 2 for French and Spanish, and we've had native speakers record all of the words. So if there's a word there that you don't know how it sounds, you can go and just listen to the sound file and they're all there. We've also got a range of videos on pronunciation tips, accents, silent letters, and you know, a few different things there, vowel sounds, so just helping you with those. But again, it's a growing collection. If something that you feel would be really useful, do let us know, because we're adding to it all the time.